And in today's episode, in that same vein, we are going to talk about why the IRS may owe you a tax refund from the COVID period. We're going to also talk about what you need to do as a taxpayer to protect your right to claim that refund.
Welcome to the Tax Relief with Timlin Bowens podcast. Are you behind on taxes? Is the IRS threatening you or your business? Are you overwhelmed and confused about how to resolve your tax issues? Let's join Timlin as she explains your options and how she may be able to help. Timlin Bowens is America's favorite EA.
Hey, family. Welcome to episode 85 of the Tax Relief with Timlin Bowens podcast. In last episode, we talked about how the IRS doesn't always get it right. And in today's episode, in that same vein, we are going to talk about why the IRS may owe you a tax refund from the COVID period. We're going to also talk about what you need to do as a taxpayer to protect your right to claim that refund. All right. So, usually, when the IRS is in the wrong, media goes out with a lot of different sound bites and they don't give you the complete story and everything that you need to make sure that you're qualified to take advantage of this. Or they take something that only a small number of people are qualified to actually benefit from and they make it seem like everybody's a candidate. Well, for this particular thing, not everyone is going to be a candidate, but even the taxpayer advocate themselves, which is a separate function of the IRS, has admitted that tens of millions, not tens, not tens of hundreds, not tens of thousands, but tens of millions of taxpayers may be eligible for tax refunds from the COVID period. Now, before we get too far into this, hold your horses. I will tell you that my first love is the taxpayer, right? I've gotten a bit off track with my fellow tax pros, but in this episode, I want to break this down so you have a clear understanding of what your next step should be. So if you're a tax pro listening, I apologize because in this episode, this is really for the taxpayer, and I'm not going to get real heavy into code sections and stuff like this because my main goal here, as always, is to fill the tax literacy gap one taxpayer at a time. So, for my taxpayers listening, if you were hit with a failure to file penalty during the COVID era, if you were hit with a failure to pay or deposit penalty during the COVID era, if you were hit with failure to pay as an individual during that era, and the interest connected to it, you may be eligible to get that removed. Now, interest is connected to the penalties, right? So that's what that's about because we know the IRS can't abate interest, okay? But here's the reason why. Because as I stated right at the beginning of this episode and last episode, the IRS doesn't always get it right. And that's why you have tax professionals like tax attorneys, CPAs, and enrolled agents such as myself who advocate on your behalf to make sure that your taxpayer rights are not trampled over. You have the right to be informed of when situations like this opportunity take place. You have the right to representation and you have the right to not pay more tax than you legally should Okay. So if you paid failure to file penalties during that time, if you paid failure to pay penalties during that time, that's why I'm here now to help inform you and potentially represent you in this situation if you deem necessary. So let's talk about what happened. Right now, there's a case that's being shared. It's the Kwong v. United States case. But I want to mention one that happened in 2024 before the Kwong case in 2025. Okay. So we had Abdo, first commissioner. And in this case, the United States Tax Court went along with Abdo and invalidated the Treasury regulations that restricted tax deadline extensions. So what they essentially said, and forgive me because I'm a tax nerd. I'll go a little tax code on you, right? But the court looked at the code section 7508A, subsection D, and said that it provides an automatic self-executing 60-day deadline postponement for taxpayers during the federally declared disasters, which the IRS cannot shorten. So, with that, I know I've slept a lot since 2020. You've probably slept a lot since 2020. But in case you were unaware or forgot, January 2020 of the year, or I'm sorry, January 20th of 2020 through July 10th of 2023 were declared a federal disaster. It was the COVID-19 pandemic disaster period. What Abdoverse Commissioner says is that because this was declared a disaster, taxpayers have until the end of the disaster plus 60 days to actually get things filed. Okay, so that means that deadlines that made the failure to file penalty start accruing and the failure to pay penalty start accruing, those should have been ignored. Now, what does this mean? That would put us to July 10th, 2023. Okay? Or I'm sorry, July 10th, 2023 is when we should have been done. So, if you are familiar with the refund statute expiration date, that is how long you have to claim a refund. Now, if you overpay your taxes and you file, you get a refund, right? Sometimes payments don't get applied to the right thing, or sometimes there was a penalty that was paid. And with the refund statute expiration date, you have 3 years from the time that the return and payment were due to claim the refund, or 2 years after payment was actually made. Now, it's my understanding that if the penalty was paid, there is going to be some flexibility here from the July 10th, 2023 date until July 10th of 2026. Okay. Now, what happened with this case is it went unappealed, and the tax court's decision has created an amazing opportunity for taxpayers such as yourself to receive refunds of their penalties. Now, for those of us in the tax world, we call this penalty abatement. But this refund is not going to be automatic. This penalty abatement is not going to be automatic. You have to file a Form 843 by July 10th of 2026 to protect your claim to refund. Now, why do I say protect your claim if this case already made it where, oh snap, everything's going to be okay? This is why. Moving forward, from the Abdo case, which was 2024 to 2025, we had another case with a decision, Kwong versus United States. This decision was made in 2025, and essentially it agreed with the Abdo versus Commissioner ruling. But we have a little bit extra here. With this, in the case, the tax court interpreted the postponement statute more narrowly, okay, and disagreed that the statute suspended filing and payment obligations for 3.5 years. Now, I just told you the taxpayer advocate themselves said tens of millions of taxpayers may be eligible for a refund. And if you owe a balance currently, you're not going to get an actual refund. It'll get applied to the balance. But nevertheless, that is a lot of money that would be going out the IRS door, right? The Treasury's door. It is my humble opinion that the Kwong decision is going to be appealed. This could go back and forth for a very long time. I'd even say years. But if you file a protective claim, which means you still file that Form 843 to protect your right to the refund, you must do so by July 10th of 2026. So yes, you're listening to this. It's May 22nd when this is going to air. So you have less than 2 months to get this done. Now, here are the types of things, again, that you could be refunded. Any overpayment interest that was paid to the IRS for the 2020 through 2023 disaster period. Remember, I said that's January 20th of 2020 through July of 2023. Now, you could also be looking at getting interest that began accruing earlier than it should have, or not at all. And as I mentioned earlier, any penalties that were assessed for failure to timely file returns, failure to pay taxes, or failure to make estimated tax payments. Okay? Now, the IRS disagrees with this, right? It says that they followed due process, they were within their rights to begin assessing those penalties and interest. My standpoint is if you have the opportunity to potentially get your debt reduced and you have the opportunity to potentially get a refund of overpayment, why not take it? Right? Again, the IRS disagrees. They disagreed, and I do believe they're going to appeal it. I don't know if a final decision will be made next year in 2027 or if it won't be made until 2030. But here's the thing that I do know. In today's economy, every penny, even though they've been eliminated, and every dollar count. The impacted taxpayers here are not just our millionaires, right? It's not just our low income taxpayer. This is a situation that affects taxpayers all across the spectrum. Okay. So if you would like to file that protective claim, again, you need to use Form 843. This form is the claim for refund and request for abatement. All right. Now, with this, there is an IRM, which is the Internal Revenue Manual provision that tells you that you should write across the top of this form protective refund claim pursuant to Kwong case. Okay. Now, again, I want to keep reiterating this. This needs to be filed by July 10th of 2026. And if you're new to the podcast, you may not know this. With the USPS postmark updates and just in general, when you send stuff to the IRS, my recommendation is that you always send it certified. First class is great, but that green certified stamp, or not stamp, receipt is what works best with the IRS. You want to be able to show, hey, I actually got this mailed off on July 10th. And you also want to be able to check yourself to make sure that it reached the IRS. Because let's say the Kwong ruling stands and you as a taxpayer are due a refund. But then the IRS comes back and says, hey, we received your 843, but guess what? We received it and it was postmarked July 11th. You want to be able to come back with that certified receipt and say, no, sir, no, ma'am. It was on time, July 10th, and we are going to fight this to be able to get our refund. All right. Now, don't put yourself in that position. Make sure that you have the 843 mailed to the appropriate IRS office by July 10th and that you keep your proof, okay, that you got it in time. Now, here are some things that you can do if you're like, I don't really know if I'm eligible for it or not. You should go check out your IRS tax account transcript to see if you paid any penalties during that time, the COVID-19 pandemic era. So between January 20th of 2020 through the beginning of 2023. Now, if you don't have an account at irs.gov, I wrote an article a few years ago that shows you how to set up an account and how to pull your transcripts. You will want to make sure that you pull the tax account transcript because this is going to tell you when your tax return was filed. It's also going to tell you when tax was assessed. You're going to see any penalties and interest charged. Okay. So this is what's going to be very important because when you pull your 2020 transcript, you're going to be able to see for that tax year when that tax return was filed. You're going to be able to see if there was any failure to file penalty assessed. You're going to be able to see if there was any failure to pay penalty assessed in the interest. Okay. If you see those things, then you'll be able to add up how much you could potentially be getting refunded. Now, check this out. I don't judge anybody's tax competency, right? Is this something that you could DIY? Yes, it is. However, don't forget that you have the right to representation. As I mentioned earlier, you have EAs, CPAs, and tax attorneys who will be handling this work. Now, as far as EAs, such as myself, and CPAs, we can get the work done for you. We can get it into the IRS, but here is a disclaimer. If this goes to further appeals before the tax court, we can't handle anything in tax court, which, like I said, we may or may not get that far with this. So that is just something to take into consideration. Also, you have the right to representation, but that doesn't mean that these EAs, CPAs, or tax attorneys are going to be working for free. I'll give you an example. To pull somebody's transcripts and do an investigation to see how much they owe, to create a game plan for how we're going to tackle that debt. My firm, if you owe less than $100,000, would charge you $1,500 for that. Now, the 843s, depending on severity, because for tax preparation, we do forms-based pricing, the 843 is going to be $350. So Let's say that you have penalties and you have interest for 2 tax years here, and you'd like for Bowen's Tax Solutions to become your POA and handle this for you to file your protective claim. Right out the door, I can tell you, you would be looking at $2,200. Okay. Now, there are companies that are popping up and they are willing to assist you almost in a DIY fashion. You'd be a little more hands-on and they wouldn't quite have POA, but they would check for you to see if you're eligible for this penalty relief. And then they do that for free and then charge you a contingency fee. Okay. So what a contingency fee is a fee based on how much they're able to save you. Now, I will tell you this, as an EA myself and CPAs, this applies to them and tax attorneys, we are all under something called Circular 230. Typically, we cannot charge contingency fees, but for penalty abatement, that is an exception. So let me go back. When I said out the door to do the protective claim for this, let's say you had 2 tax years at Bowen's Tax Solutions, you would be paying $2,200. That is correct. However, with me being on as POA, if and when they forgive the penalties and the interest and you get that refund, I would be able to see that and I too charge a contingency fee and would send you that invoice. Okay? So I just wanted to be clear on that. But one of the companies that I have done a review of is IRS Penalty Back. Now, I will tell you, working with them is likely going to be a little cheaper than working with me. And I'll give you the disclaimer that if you go to them, I will get a commission if they're able to help you get your penalties back. Okay, a refund of the penalties. With that being said, if you don't feel comfortable checking your own transcripts, and if you'd like somebody else to do that for you up front without a fee, IRS Penalty Back might be the place for you to go. In the show notes, I'm going to leave a resource to show you how to pull your own transcripts and look. But I'm also going to leave a link to IRS Penalty Back because if, again, you don't feel comfortable checking yourself, but maybe you're tight on funds up front and you just want to check out your eligibility, IRS Penalty Back may be a good solution for you. I'm going to also be doing a review of them on the YouTube channel. So if you're not already, make sure that you're subscribed to americasfavoriteea.com, or I'm sorry, America's Favorite EA on YouTube, and you should see that video this weekend. Okay? Now, I know we've gone over a lot, right? You may be one of the tens of millions that the taxpayer advocate has said will be due a refund. Help me help taxpayers. If this podcast provided clarity for you about the refund, how it came about, and if you're eligible, help me spread the good news to the millions of taxpayers who may be unaware of this opportunity. Okay? You can share the podcast whether you're listening on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. Help me to fill this tax literacy gap one taxpayer at a time. Help me protect your taxpayer bill of rights by not paying more in taxes than you're legally obligated to make sure that the IRS follows the rules just like we have to, and that they don't charge penalties and they don't charge interest when they're not allowed to. Okay? I appreciate your time. Thank you in advance for listening to this episode, for sharing it. And if you're one of those people that are eligible to receive this refund and you'd like to work with me, you can book a call at bowenstaxsolutions.com. But even if you don't work with me, just make sure you get the help you need. All right? I'd like to thank you for taking the time to listen today. I'd like to thank Jim Ray Consulting Services for helping me get this message out to you. I hope you found the information helpful. Did you know 1 in 50 people have a tax problem? Please share this episode with your friends and family because you never know who may need help. Again, thanks for listening. Hey, just as a reminder, this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. It provides a framework and possible solutions for solving your tax problems, but it is not legally binding. Please consult your tax professional regarding your specific tax situation.